Have you ever wondered what dark secrets celebrities take to their graves? What if everything you thought you knew about your favorite stars was just a carefully crafted illusion? Number 14. Walt Disney's controversial views. Did the man who created the happiest place on Earth harbor some of the darkest thoughts? For decades after his death in 1966, Walt Disney was revered as a visionary who brought joy to millions of children worldwide. His legacy seemed untouchable until it wasn't. Years after Disney's passing, allegations began to surface about his personal views, particularly regarding race and politics. Former employees and associates came forward with stories suggesting Disney held antisemitic and racist beliefs that would shock modern audiences. While Disney's public persona was that of a wholesome family entertainer, these posthumous revelations painted a more complex picture. During his lifetime, Disney testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee and named several animators as suspected communists during the McCarthy era, a fact that remained relatively unknown until historians began digging into archives decades later. Disney biographers remain divided on the extent of these allegations. Some defend the entertainment mogul, pointing to his employment practices, which included hiring people of various backgrounds during an era when such inclusion wasn't common. Others cite memoirs and interviews from those who worked closely with him, suggesting his private comments and attitudes contrasted sharply with his public image. What makes this scandal particularly fascinating is the careful protection of Disney's reputation during his lifetime. The Disney Corporation has spent millions maintaining Walt's wholesome image, making these posthumous revelations all the more jarring to fans who grew up idolizing the man behind Mickey Mouse. Can we separate the art from the artist when new information emerges after they're gone? Number 13. Jimmy Savile's horrific predatory behavior. How could one of Britain's most beloved television personalities hide in plain sight for so long? Jimmy Savile, a BBC presenter and charity fundraiser, was celebrated across the United Kingdom during his lifetime. He received a knighthood, raised millions for hospitals, and was welcomed into homes, schools, and even children's hospitals without question. Within days of Savile's death in 2011, the facade began to crumble. What followed was perhaps one of the most shocking scandals in British entertainment history. Hundreds of allegations of sexual abuse emerged, spanning decades of Savile's career. The victims' accounts were harrowing, describing abuse in BBC dressing rooms, hospitals, schools, and even a hospice. The subsequent investigations revealed that many complaints had been made during Savile's lifetime, but they were either ignored, dismissed, or covered up by various institutions. The BBC faced severe criticism for fostering a culture that enabled Savile's behavior and for dropping an investigative program about the allegations shortly after his death. The scale of Savile's crimes was staggering. Police investigations identified at least 450 victims aged between 8 and 47, making it one of the most extensive cases of serial sexual abuse in British history. The scandal triggered multiple investigations, including the Smith Review and the Dame Janet Smith Review, which examined how Savile had been able to commit these crimes while working at the BBC. The most disturbing aspect of the Savile case wasn't just the crimes themselves, but how a combination of celebrity status, charity work, and powerful connections had created a shield of invincibility around him during his lifetime. Only in death, when he could no longer threaten legal action or leverage his connections, did the truth finally emerge. The Savile scandal fundamentally changed how institutions across the UK handle safeguarding and allegations of abuse. Number 12. Elvis Presley's prescription drug addiction. Was the king of rock and roll actually a victim of prescription medication abuse? When Elvis Presley died in 1977 at the age of 42, the official cause was listed as cardiac arrhythmia. The public narrative suggested a heart attack had taken the beloved star. It was only years later that the full picture of Elvis's health struggles and addiction came into focus. Posthumous investigations revealed that Elvis had been prescribed over 10,000 doses of sedatives, amphetamines, narcotics, and other drugs in the last 20 months of his life alone. His personal physician, Dr. George Nishapoulos, known as Dr. Nick, was later charged with criminal prescribing practices, though he was acquitted. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners eventually suspended his medical license in the 1990s after it became clear he had prescribed thousands of doses of controlled substances to numerous patients. What made this revelation particularly shocking was how it contradicted Elvis's public stance on drugs. In 1970, Elvis had famously met with President Nixon, offering to help fight drug abuse in America. The photo of this meeting remains one of the most requested images from the National Archives. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Elvis was struggling with a severe prescription drug dependency that ultimately contributed to his premature death. The scandal highlighted the stark contrast between Elvis's public image and private struggles. It also drew attention to the practice of celebrity doctors providing stars with prescription medications that would be difficult for ordinary people to obtain. Elvis's death and the subsequent revelations about his drug use became a watershed moment in public understanding of prescription drug addiction. Before this, many Americans still viewed addiction as something that exclusively affected people using illegal street drugs, not prescription medications given by doctors. Years after his death, medical experts reviewing Elvis's case have suggested that his death was likely the result of polypharmacy, the interaction of multiple prescription drugs in his system, combined with his underlying health problems. The man who had been a symbol of American vitality and rebellion had been privately fighting a losing battle with addiction, a truth that only fully emerged after he could no longer protect his carefully crafted public image. Number 11. Alfred Hitchcock's treatment of actresses. Did the master of suspense terrorize the very women who helped make his films famous? Alfred Hitchcock's reputation as one of cinema's greatest directors remained largely untarnished during his lifetime. It wasn't until years after his 1980 death that disturbing accounts began to emerge about his treatment of the blonde actresses who featured prominently in his films. The most notable allegations came from Tippi Hedren, star of The Birds, and Marnie, who waited until 2016 to fully detail her experiences in her memoir. Hedren described how Hitchcock became obsessed with her, made unwanted sexual advances, threatened to ruin her career when she rejected him, and subjected her to unnecessary physical and psychological torment during filming. The most infamous example occurred during the filming of The Birds, when Hitchcock allegedly had live birds thrown at Hedren for 5 days of shooting the attic scene, despite having promised to use mechanical ones. Other actresses, including Vera Miles and Kim Novak, later shared their own uncomfortable experiences working with Hitchcock. The director's controlling behavior, particularly toward his blonde leading ladies, became a pattern that film historians and biographers have since documented extensively. What makes this scandal particularly complex is how it forces a reevaluation of Hitchcock's work. Many of his greatest films feature blonde women in peril, subjected to voyeuristic gazes and psychological torment. Were these artistic choices, or were they manifestations of Hitchcock's personal obsessions? The posthumous revelations about Hitchcock's behavior toward actresses have led film scholars to re-examine his movies through a different lens, finding troubling parallels between his personal behavior and his cinematic choices. During his lifetime, Hitchcock's eccentric behavior was often dismissed as the quirks of a genius. The power dynamics of Hollywood during that era made it nearly impossible for actresses to speak out without risking their careers. Only after Hitchcock's death, and particularly in the wake of the Me Too movement, have these stories been taken seriously and incorporated into the broader understanding of the director's legacy. Number 10. Pablo Neruda's abandonment of his disabled daughter. How could a poet who wrote so beautifully about love have abandoned his own child? Pablo Neruda, the Nobel Prize-winning Chilean poet whose romantic verses are read at weddings worldwide, had a dark chapter in his personal life that remained largely unknown until after his 1973 death. In his posthumously published memoirs, Neruda briefly mentioned having a daughter, Malva Marina, with his first wife. What he conveniently omitted was that Malva was born with hydrocephalus and other health issues, and that he abandoned her and her mother in the Netherlands during World War II. Malva died at age 8 in 1943, malnourished and without her father present. This revelation contrasted sharply with Neruda's public image as a humanist and champion of the oppressed. His poetry speaks of deep human connection and compassion, yet his treatment of his own vulnerable daughter suggested a profound disconnect between his art and his personal choices. As scholars began investigating this aspect of Neruda's life more deeply in the decades following his death, uncomfortable questions emerged about the poet's character and how knowledge of this abandonment might affect readings of his work. Some of his most devoted readers were shocked to learn about this chapter of his life, which he had carefully excluded from his public narrative. The story gained wider attention in 2011 when Chilean author Maria Isabel Sanchez published a novel titled Malva, bringing the forgotten daughter's story to light. The book prompted renewed discussion about Neruda's legacy and whether his treatment of his daughter should influence how we evaluate his literary contributions and political activism. Neruda's abandonment of Malva represents a profound contradiction in the life of one of the 20th century's most celebrated poets. It raises questions about the separation of art from artist and whether beautiful words can come from flawed human beings. Only after his death, when both his carefully constructed image and legal protections were gone, did this troubling chapter become widely known. Number 9. Judy Garland studio abuse. Did the Dream Factory break the girl who brought us over the rainbow? Judy Garland's tragic life and premature death at 47 were well documented, but the full extent of her mistreatment by MGM Studios only emerged in the decades following her 1969 passing. As Garland's contemporaries aged and the strict studio system dissolved, insiders began speaking more openly about the abuse young Judy endured while filming classics like The Wizard of Oz. Studio executives put the teenage star on a regimen of amphetamines to control her weight and barbiturates to help her sleep, essentially initiating the cycle of addiction that would plague her throughout her life. Former MGM employees revealed that Garland was limited to chicken soup and coffee to maintain her figure, with studio head Louis B. Mayer referring to her as his little hunchback due to her height and calling her ugly. The psychological abuse was relentless. She was told repeatedly she wasn't pretty enough and was valuable only for her voice. The most heartbreaking revelations concerned Garland's treatment during the filming of The Wizard of Oz when she was just 16. Crew members later admitted that the young actress was forced to wear a painful corset to appear younger, was given pills to control her appetite and energy levels, and was allowed only 4 hours of sleep during grueling shooting schedules. These posthumous revelations transformed public understanding of Garland's struggles with addiction and mental health. What had once been framed as personal weaknesses or the inability to handle fame was recontextualized as a direct result of institutional abuse by a powerful studio system that treated child stars as commodities rather than human beings. Garland's daughter, Liza Minnelli, and others who knew her helped reshape the narrative around her mother's life in the years following her death. Rather than just another cautionary tale about the dangers of fame, Garland's story became one of survival and resilience in the face of systematic abuse by powerful men who controlled every aspect of her life from childhood. Only after her death, when those who had witnessed her mistreatment felt safe to speak, did the full truth emerge about what happened behind the scenes at MGM. Number 8. Bob Marley's secret cancer treatment. Did the reggae legend's spiritual beliefs lead to his untimely death? When Bob Marley died in 1981 at just 36 years old, fans worldwide mourned the premature loss of the reggae pioneer. The public knew he had been diagnosed with melanoma, but the complete story of his treatment choices remained private until after his death. Posthumous biographies revealed that when doctors discovered melanoma in Marley's toe in 1977, they recommended amputation. Marley, guided by his Rastafarian religious beliefs which opposed cutting the flesh, refused the procedure. Instead, he opted for alternative treatments that were less invasive but ultimately less effective at stopping the cancer's spread. By the time Marley sought more conventional medical treatment in 1980, the cancer had metastasized throughout his body. His final months were spent trying experimental treatments in Germany under the care of controversial physician Joseph Issels, whose unconventional cancer therapies have been criticized by mainstream medical professionals. What makes this revelation particularly poignant is how it illustrates the complex intersection of spiritual beliefs, cultural values, and medical decisions. Marley's choice wasn't simply a rejection of modern medicine, but a decision deeply rooted in his religious convictions and mistrust of Western medical establishments, a mistrust shared by many in Jamaica due to the country's colonial history. Friends and family members who spoke after Marley's death expressed that the musician understood the potential consequences of his decision, but felt compelled to honor his spiritual beliefs above all else. The revelation transformed public understanding of Marley's passing from a simple tragedy to a complex moral and spiritual choice made by an artist who lived according to his convictions, even when facing death. This posthumous insight into Marley's medical decisions has prompted ongoing discussions about patients' rights, cultural competence in healthcare, and the tensions between spiritual beliefs and medical science. Only after his death did the public gain a complete understanding of the choices that ultimately shortened the life of one of music's most influential figures. Number 7. Marilyn Monroe's political connections. Was America's most famous blonde bombshell caught in a dangerous political web? Marilyn Monroe's 1962 death at age 36 was officially ruled a probable suicide, but the decades following her passing have seen a steady stream of revelations about her connections to powerful political figures, connections that some conspiracy theorists suggest may have contributed to her demise. While rumors about Monroe's affair with President John F. Kennedy circulated during her lifetime, the full extent of her relationships with both JFK and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, only emerged years after her death. Former staff members, government agents, and friends of Monroe eventually came forward with accounts of her entanglements with the Kennedy family. Perhaps most notably, FBI files released decades after Monroe's death revealed that J. Edgar Hoover had ordered extensive surveillance of the actress due to her associations with known communists and suspected political activities. These files showed that government agencies were far more concerned with Monroe's political connections than her public image as a somewhat ditzy sex symbol would have suggested. Biographers and investigators have uncovered evidence that in her final months, Monroe had become increasingly politically engaged, speaking out against nuclear proliferation and showing interest in civil rights causes. She had also allegedly threatened to hold a press conference revealing details about her relationships with powerful political figures, including the Kennedys. What makes these posthumous revelations particularly unsettling is how they transform our understanding of Monroe from a tragic Hollywood casualty to potentially something more complex, a woman whose connections to power may have placed her in genuine danger. While definitive proof of foul play has never emerged, the steady drip of information about Monroe's political entanglements has ensured that questions about her death remain in the public consciousness. The posthumous exposure of Monroe's political connections also forces a reevaluation of her public persona. Far from being merely a beautiful actress with limited intellectual depth as she was often portrayed, these revelations suggest Monroe was engaged with the political issues of her time and potentially privy to sensitive information that powerful people might have preferred to keep private. Only after her death, when documents were declassified and those who knew her felt safe to speak, did this more complex portrait begin to emerge. Number 6. Michael Jackson's financial troubles. Was the king of pop actually broke? Michael Jackson's lavish lifestyle seemed to reflect his status as one of the world's most successful entertainers. From his 2,700-acre Neverland Ranch with its private amusement park to his legendary shopping sprees, Jackson projected an image of limitless wealth. Only after his sudden death in 2009 did the true state of his finances come to light. Court documents filed during the administration of his estate revealed that Jackson was approximately $500 million in debt when he died. Years of excessive spending, declining record sales, and expensive legal battles had severely compromised his financial situation. The Neverland Ranch, his crown jewel, was nearly foreclosed upon in 2008, forcing Jackson to accept a deal that transferred ownership to an investment company. Perhaps most shocking was the revelation that Jackson had been using his valuable catalog of music rights, including the Beatles' catalog, as collateral for loans. The very asset that financial advisors had once praised as his smartest investment had become leveraged to maintain his unsustainable lifestyle. Former business managers and financial advisors came forward after his death, describing their frustrated attempts to rein in Jackson's spending. They painted a picture of a man who was simultaneously one of the highest-earning entertainers in history and someone who consistently spent more than he earned. Some alleged that Jackson had been surrounded by opportunistic advisors who encouraged his spending while taking substantial fees. The posthumous financial revelations transformed understanding of Jackson's planned This Is It concert series, which had been announced shortly before his death. What had seemed like a triumphant comeback was revealed to be a financial necessity. Jackson needed the performance income to address his mounting debts. In a final ironic twist, Jackson's death dramatically reversed his financial fortunes. In the years following his passing, his estate generated hundreds of millions in revenue through posthumous album releases, the documentary This Is It, and various licensing deals. The estate eventually cleared his debts and became highly profitable, with Jackson consistently ranking among the highest-earning deceased celebrities each year according to Forbes magazine. The man who died deeply in debt has earned over $2 billion since his death, a financial resurrection that only became possible when the truth about his financial troubles emerged. Number 5. Roald Dahl's antisemitism. Could the beloved children's author who gave us Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Matilda have harbored dark prejudices? Roald Dahl created magical worlds that have enchanted generations of young readers, but after his death in 1990, a different side of the author came to light. While Dahl had made some controversial comments during his lifetime, the full extent of his anti-Semitic views only became widely known after his passing. In a 1990 interview with The Independent published shortly before his death, Dahl stated, "I'm certainly anti-Israeli, and I've become anti-Semitic in as much as that you get a Jewish person in another country like England strongly supporting Zionism." This interview received relatively little attention at the time, but was rediscovered and widely circulated after his death. Further research into Dahl's personal correspondence and other interviews revealed additional anti-Semitic statements. In a 1983 review of a book about the Lebanon War in the Literary Review, he wrote, "There is a trait in the Jewish character that does provoke animosity. Even a stinker like Hitler didn't just pick on them for no reason." These comments and others like them shocked many fans who had grown up loving his children's stories. What makes this posthumous revelation particularly complex is how it forces readers and literary critics to grapple with the disconnect between Dahl's imaginative, often morally instructive children's literature and his personal prejudices. His books often champion the underdog and condemn cruelty and intolerance, values that seem at odds with his expressed antisemitism. In 2020, 30 years after Dahl's death, his family finally issued an apology for his anti-Semitic comments, acknowledging that his prejudiced remarks are incomprehensible to us and stand in marked contrast to the man we knew. This belated acknowledgement highlighted how long these revelations had lingered as an uncomfortable footnote to Dahl's literary legacy. The posthumous exposure of Dahl's antisemitism has prompted ongoing discussions about whether we can or should separate art from artist, especially when the art in question is beloved by children. Schools and libraries have debated whether to continue promoting his books, and readers have had to reconcile their love for characters like Matilda and Charlie Bucket with the troubling views of their creator. a reconciliation that only became necessary after death stripped away the carefully maintained public image of one of the world's most successful children's authors. Number 4. John Lennon's domestic violence. Was the peace activist who asked us to imagine actually violent in his private life? John Lennon's public image during the later years of his life was that of a peace advocate, devoted family man, and progressive thinker. After his murder in 1980, he was virtually canonized by fans worldwide. It wasn't until years later that a more complicated picture emerged. In a 1980 Playboy interview published after his death, Lennon himself had hinted at his violent past. "I used to be cruel to my woman and physically, any woman. I was a hitter. I couldn't express myself and I hit." At the time, few picked up on the significance of this confession. As years passed, both Cynthia Lennon, his first wife, and son Julian shared their experiences of Lennon's temper and emotional absence. The most detailed account came in the 2005 biography, John, by Cynthia Lennon. She described specific incidents of physical violence, including Lennon slapping her across the face in a fit of jealousy. Julian Lennon later spoke about his father's emotional abuse and absence, contrasting sharply with the image of the devoted family man that Lennon had cultivated with his second wife, Yoko Ono, and their son Sean.